clinical psych clinical psychologist recognized internationally for her expertise in the psychological impact of tinnitus and hyperacusis on well-being. She is the CEO and founder of mindfultinnitusrelief.com, the first ever self-administered 8-week online skill building course of its kind for learning how to shift tinnitus from bothersome to non-bothersome. With both a cognitive behavioral and mindfulness meditation approach, Dr. Gans presents globally to physicians, researchers, patients, and audiologists on their research and tinnitus patient education, a critical piece of the tinnitus management puzzle. And with that, Dr. Gans, Jennifer, thank you for joining us from the sunny West Coast. And now it's over to you.
Oh, well, thank you so much. Thank you, Bonnie. And I also want to really thank the American Tinnitus Association. They are putting on the Tinnitus Awareness Week, and this is part of the programming for the week is to educate on tinnitus. So without further ado, we have lost a little bit of time, so I'm going to just dive right in. All right, so let's talk about tinnitus education. Okay, my goals for today are to make sure that everybody leaves this talk as an expert in what tinnitus is exactly, accurately, what tinnitus is and what it isn't, to help everyone feel less anxious around tinnitus, and then talk about stress reduction and other ways of working with tinnitus so that we can allow our brains to habituate to this benign body sensation. So, if there are any clinicians out here, my goal for today is to get you really excited to see your next tinnitus patient. And for those patients out there or people that have bothersome tinnitus, my goal is to get you on a path that starts with accurate education. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to jump right in. Now, I always put in a disclaimer before I start speaking, saying that I can sound very easy breezy about tinnitus. Okay, by that I mean I can it's just a benign body sensation, it's a paper tiger, all of these things that are said that I will say about tinnitus are not meant to be easy breezy about it. However, they can sound that way because it's not lost on me that tinnitus can be very devastating to somebody who is suffering with tinnitus. Now, I've sat for thousands of hours with people with bothersome tinnitus. So again, it is not lost on me that this can be very life-changing and a real trauma to so many. However, it's hard for me to get too excited about a benign body sensation. So without further ado, let's talk about what is tinnitus. Now, sometimes when I'm working with people, I'd say about 50% of the time, I ask them, well, what do you think tinnitus is? And the majority of them will say, well, I don't know, or and the others will say, well, nobody knows and there's nothing we can do about it. Well, both are actually inaccurate. Okay. So what is tinnitus? We know exactly what it is. Tinnitus is a benign body sensation that the brain thinks is important to pay attention to when in fact it can safely let it recede to the background. Okay, so I'm going to probably say that 15 or so times today. So, but tinnitus is a benign body sensation that the brain has misunderstood as important to pay attention to when in fact it isn't. Okay, now the word benign doesn't mean good. The word benign specifically means it's not an indication of a greater illness. Now, I've never met anybody who wants tinnitus. So, for example, if you have a brain tumor, you sure hope it's benign, right? But nobody wants a brain tumor. Well, similarly, I've never met a person that said, gee, I love my tinnitus. So benign is not an indication that it isn't a credible complaint that needs to be addressed. But it is saying that it is not an indication of a greater illness. So let's talk about the numbers, okay? So 50 million Americans, okay, we're just talking the United States, 50 million Americans experience tinnitus. Now that's such a large number that it's not really giving us, any real solid information. So I'm going to break that into very simple groups. So there are 20 million Americans of that 50 million. So 20 million Americans are bothered enough by their tinnitus to go to their doctor and say, oh no, this is terrible. This is horrible. I can't live like this. All right, so we're going to call that the bothersome group, that 20 million group. So then if we do the math, that leaves 30 million Americans that are walking the streets of our country with tinnitus, and they don't care. So when I'm working with patients with tinnitus, I say to them, my goal is not to make it such that you're able to get rid of tinnitus, because that's not something I can control. I'm guessing that's not something anybody who has tinnitus can control, or I'm guessing they would have done it already. So I don't, in my work, I try not to work on things that that I have no control of. However, I 100% know that anybody that falls in the bothersome category of tinnitus can shift their tinnitus from bothersome into the 30 million non-bothersome category. Okay, so I mean that's a big claim, 100%, but everybody is capable of habituating to tinnitus, and so we just have to figure out what's keeping you stuck. And so when I'm working with patients, like I said before, the top 3 things that are necessary, 3 is going to come up a lot today, to help people habituate naturally, because habituation, again, is something that any human can do, is helping people to feel less anxious around tinnitus, making sure they're an expert in what it is. This is critical because, humans are meaning-making creatures. When we understand things, we can feel less stressed. We can feel more at peace when we understand something, okay? So this is a very, very important part. And then again, talking about stress reduction as a lifetime achievement so that we can start responding to tinnitus in new ways rather than falling back on old reactions to tinnitus. So again, we're going to touch on all of those, and I want to also explain the person behind tinnitus. So these are just a framework for what we're going to continue to talk about. So now what causes tinnitus? We know what causes tinnitus, okay? Tinnitus is, I'm going to use phantom limb sensation as my example. So here's my hand right here, but my hand is actually right here, okay? This is where all the sensations come to. This is where all the commands come from. And this is where all the memories of my hand are. They are right here. So the human mind, we have to understand the human mind. The mind loves to fill things in, okay? The human brain loves to fill things in. Our brain is like a predicting machine. It loves to, make predictions and, to prepare them to save your life if that's in fact necessary. So the brain is constantly downloading data, and its job is to take all that data and make accurate predictions about what's going on around. And so, for example, we have a blind spot, that many of us have never even witnessed before, but we all have a blind spot. That's where the optic nerve hits the back of the eye. But what the brain does for us is a favor. It basically just fills in everything so that we don't look out at the horizon and see a black hole. The brain just anticipates that that's, not worth paying attention to and just fills in the rest. Now, going back to the hand, okay? So for those who have heard of phantom limb sensation or phantom pain, if I cut my hand off, the brain says, wait a minute, where's my hand? It must be here. I've always had a hand. I've used it all the time. I better look for it. So the brain starts to search and search and search, and it gets really frustrated because it can't find it. So what does it do? It searches harder and harder and harder, and boom, All that excitation in the search creates the sensation as if the hand were still there. Okay, so that much we know. Now let's talk about the ears. Okay, so I often like to look at one body part or one system of the body to help me explain other systems of the body. And so let's move from the sense of touch to the sense of hearing. Okay, so inside the inner ear, we're going to talk about the inner ear. We have what's called the cochlea, and it's basically the last hurrah before sound goes to the auditory nerve and to the auditory cortex, and we get the sensation of sound or the experience of sound. So this little cochlea is shaped like a snail shell, and on the inner lining of this snail shell are these tiny little hair cells or cilia. Okay, and so let's take this snail shell, imagine it's just turning in on itself, the cochlea, and let's unravel it in front of us so that it's straight out in front of us here with all of the cilia or hair cells sticking up. Well, the high frequency hair cells are here, the low frequency hair cells are down here, and just like a piano, we have every hair cell in between. Okay, so let's start from the low notes, the low frequency hair cells, and let's start rolling it back up again. Roll it, roll it, roll it, roll it, roll it, so that the mouth of the cochlea corresponds to the high frequency hair cells, and deep, deep, deep inside are the low frequency hair cells. Now, when we're born, the ears perk up, or actually they do in utero, but throughout our entire lives, air is coming through the ear canal. And over time, it starts to chafe off, starting with the highest frequencies first. Okay? And so again, ears never shut off. And even if you were born with hearing loss, your ears are still working and pulling in whatever sound they are pulling in. But what happens over a person's lifetime is these waves of air come and start to chafe off the highest frequency hair cells first. And so what does the brain do? It says, wait a minute, that's weird. I've always been able to hear those frequencies. Well, I better search for it. So the brain starts to search and search and search, and it gets really frustrated because it can't find it. So it starts to search harder and harder and harder, and boom, it creates the sensation that we call tinnitus. So that's kind of my not so technical way of saying that the silly brain is searching for a sound that it's no longer able to perceive. That's all that's wrong. There's nothing broken. There's nothing to fix. The brain has made an error. Okay, the silly brain is starting to search for a sound that it's no longer able to perceive, and in that excitation is creating the sound of tinnitus. So we want to also understand, then why wouldn't we all have tinnitus if we all lose hair cells over a lifetime? Well, we have to talk a little bit about the brain in order to understand why somebody would fall into the bothersome category or why somebody would fall into the non-bothersome category, okay? Or in no category whatsoever. So let's talk about the brain, the human brain, and I'm going to keep this as simple as possible, okay? We're going to break the brain down into three parts. We have the brain stem, which is basically heartbeat, respiration, sleep-wake cycles, hunger, all those things that our brain does for us that we don't have to be consciously aware of because, we've got better things to be thinking about. So our brain basically does us a favor, and it takes control of those types of body events. Okay, so that's subconscious. Now, the midbrain is the second part of the brain to develop, and that's what we call the limbic system, or the emotional center of the brain. And inside the limbic system, we have this tiny little almond-shaped area called the amygdala. Now, the amygdala has a job. It's very small but very mighty. The amygdala has a job of taking in information from the external world and taking in information from the internal world and making a decision. Now, the decision that the amygdala makes is this sensation a credible danger, or I don't really even know what it is, so I better keep my lens locked and loaded on it because it could be a danger? Or is this benign, not interesting, can just very safely move to the background? Now, on the day that people first experience tinnitus, what's really happened is the brain has made an error. It made a mistake. Okay? The amygdala put it into the wrong category. The amygdala put it into the danger category. And what happens when the amygdala goes on fire and puts it into the danger category is all of a sudden it trips the autonomic nervous system. It trips the fight or flight response. So here we have this amygdala that's on fire. Now we have another portion of the brain called the thalamus that I look at as kind of the gateway between the subconscious brain and the conscious brain, which is the third part of the brain to develop. And we're going to talk specifically about the cortex or the prefrontal cortex. This is the outer bark of the brain. The prefrontal cortex is our conscious brain. Now, what happens is when the amygdala goes on fire and says, alert, alert, there's a danger here. I'm picking up on a sound that's unfamiliar and I don't know what to do with it, but I better keep my attention on it. And gosh, it's kind of scaring me. So all of a sudden the thalamus says, okay, I hear the alarm bells. And then it opens the gate and tinnitus goes from the subconscious into our conscious mind. And that's when tinnitus becomes, can become bothersome to people. And so I always ask going back a little bit, I always ask my patients or the people that I'm working with tinnitus, if you have a benign body sensation for the rest of your life and it doesn't bother you, can you be okay with that? And I would say the majority of the time, and pretty much the majority of the time, people are saying, well, sure, if it doesn't bother me, who cares? And so our work with, anybody with tinnitus, their ultimate goal would be to use the brain to change the brain. To use our prefrontal cortex, which is our area where we reason, we use logic, we place our attention where we choose it to go. Stop and think before acting. So all of these really wonderful executive functionings that we wish our teenage kids would, get more developed in are all happening right here. And so when the amygdala makes an error and judges tinnitus as being a danger, our prefrontal cortex with accurate information, which is what I'm doing today, I'm speaking from a logical place with you, and I'm filling your prefrontal cortex with accurate information so that when tinnitus starts to rear its head and comes into our consciousness, instead of old reactions of, oh my God, this is horrible. Maybe I have a brain tumor. Oh no, does this mean I'm going to lose more hearing? Oh no, how am I going to concentrate? Gosh, oh no, is this all my fault for, things I did when I was younger to my ears? And so, or even worse, oh my gosh, I went on the internet and it said that there's nobody there that can help me. And so what ends up happening is we take this benign body sensation, what do? We wrap it up in a story inside of a Gordian knot of horror stories, really, and actually false stories. And that's what keeps a person locked and loaded on tinnitus. That's what, I think of the brain as having a kind of a telephoto lens of sorts. I know I keep going like this because in our mind, we have a camera, and the telephoto lens can zoom in on things that are fearful, fascinating, or frustrating. Okay, those are generally the top three. And so when the zoom lens gets locked and loaded on something, now it can see what it's looking at with great clarity, but it can't see anything else. And so you can end up walking around with a zoom lens. You can't really see anything else but what you're looking at. Now, if you open up the aperture and open up the zoom lens, obviously what you're looking at is still there, but it's within the context of everything else around it. And so on the day that the amygdala picks up on tinnitus and makes an error, and I'll explain to you why the brain would sometimes make errors. On the day that it picks up tinnitus and autonomic nervous system, the fight or flight response gets going, the thalamus opens up, and tinnitus becomes a thing, a conscious thing. What ends up happening is whoosh, the zoom lens gets locked and loaded on tinnitus, and it gets stuck. Oh no, it gets stuck on tinnitus, and it can't get unstuck because it's wrapped up inside of the stories. And I think of all those false stories like, oh my God, maybe I have a brain tumor. Oh gosh, this means I'm going to lose my hearing. Gosh, this will probably get worse over time. These are all stories that are not true. And so what ends up happening is the lens gets locked and loaded. And, sometimes I call tinnitus kind of a stuck disorder. Again, I'm not trying to trivialize it, but at the same time, the lens is locked and loaded, and people are white knuckling tinnitus, and this is all they see. And so what we need to do is unravel those stories, open up the lens so that the person can, yeah, tinnitus might be there, but it's within the context of everything else around it. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about the person behind tinnitus. This is the fun stuff. This is, at least I find it so fun. I'm a psychologist by training, as you know, and so I've now sat for thousands of hours with people with bothersome tinnitus at all hearing levels, from, you know, full-on profoundly deaf to hard of hearing and everything in between. And so I've sat now for, again, thousands of hours, and, you know, it seems like an occupational obligation of me to share with you what I've learned. Okay, so again, I'm going to use 100%, but 100% of the time, not 83% of the time, not 99% of the time, but 100% of the time, people that come into my office, the people with bothersome tinnitus, have three qualities or three things in common, I guess you could say. Now, I don't know anything about the non-bothersome group because they don't come in to see me, but I've spent thousands of hours with people who fall into that 20 million bothersome group. And I think it's important for us to understand what those three things are, if everybody has it in common. I often talk about how if you're going to bake a cake, you can put in all kinds of things. You can put in chocolate, strawberries, vanilla, whatever you like. But at its base, it has to have certain key ingredients, okay? So when we're talking about the person with bothersome tinnitus, like a cake, they're incredibly unique. They come to the table with all different flavors and all different uniqueness to them. But at the base, they all have 1, 2, and 3 in common. And I call this the tinnitus trifecta. Okay, so I'm going to share with you what these three things are. Number 1 is hearing loss. You have to lose something in order to search for it. So this is the necessary, this hearing loss is necessary, okay? Number 2, stress. This is also necessary, and we will talk more about that in a moment. And number 3, everybody that falls into the bothersome category has what I call an amazing personality. Yes, an amazing personality, and people chuckle when I say that, but I really do mean that they have an amazing personality, because the person that I'm going to describe to you is also somebody, you know, who is somebody we celebrate in our culture. You know, this is something that they love about themselves. This is what others love about themselves. This is what their employers love about them. So this is not something, you know, negative that we're talking about in their personality, but this amazing personality has an underbelly. And it's the underbelly that's pulling them down. And so it's my job to help them to identify what the underbelly is, remove it so that they can go on their merry way with their amazing personality. So I'm going to describe this personality to you, and I want you to think about yourself or about somebody you know with tinnitus, somebody you work with tinnitus, and I want you to bring that person to mind. Certainly, I'm sure everybody here obviously knows somebody with bothersome tinnitus. So the person, I'll describe the personality, they're very alert, aware. They are taking things in, and they're vigilant. And if they spot a problem, they latch onto it, and they have trouble letting it go until they figure it out. Okay, so they're a very vigilant personality. They are, for example, they might walk into a room and they'll scan the room. And if they spot a problem, they latch on and have trouble letting it go until they figure it out. You know, people with people with hearing loss become very, very attuned to their visual, their visual acuity. So they can become very vigilant. And I don't always mean this by way of diagnosis, but there's almost an obsessive compulsive quality to the way they go about certain things. Okay, so what I'm really saying here is we have tinnitus right here, which is a benign body sensation. But what is below it is a picture of anxiety. And that is really who I'm describing when I'm talking about this amazing personality. Okay. So now, why would the brain make this mistake? Let's talk about stress. I don't know about you, but under times of great stress, maybe I haven't had a good night's sleep, maybe there's something going on at work, or I'm sick, or whatever's going on, I'm more likely to make errors. My brain is more likely to make errors. Okay, and the brain is a prediction machine. It's constantly taking in data, like I was saying before, and there's a lot of data that it's taking in. It's data download, data download, data download, and it has to have a way of organizing that. And so sometimes when we're under immense amounts of stress, we can make mistakes. And that's essentially what's happening with the amygdala. The amygdala has picked up on this tinnitus sensation and it put it in the wrong category. It never should have put it into the fear or into the frustration or the I don't know what this is category, which then goes into the number one slot in the mind's triage system, so to speak, and gets, locked and loaded. And so on that day when tinnitus first became noticeable, it simply made an error and it put it into the wrong category. And so now we are using, what we're left with is this responsibility, or what we all hope to do for ourselves is to help our brain what it can do naturally, which is habituate to tinnitus. Okay, I want to show you right now actually that all of your brains are working just fine. Okay, tinnitus is not an indication that something's broken. There's nothing to fix. Okay, because every human can habituate. Now, I want everybody to focus on the bottom of your foot right now. Okay, I want you to focus on the bottom of your foot. Take your lens, your telephoto lens, and point it onto the bottom of your foot. And so I'm going to speak for all of us. I'm going to say that, my foot right now, when I focus on it, I feel kind of a tingling, a pressure, kind of a coolness because it's a little bit chilly in here. But as soon as I take my attention away, or, if I hadn't brought our attention to the bottom of our foot, I guarantee none of us are thinking about the bottom of our foot, right? So what does the brain do for us? The brain does us a favor. It says, you know what? There's a lot of things going on right now, and I really want to focus on this information that Jennifer is trying to share with me. So that sensation on the bottom of my foot, I'm going to push it into the recesses. I'm going to not really deal with it right now. I'm going to push it out of my conscious awareness so that I can focus on what my mind thinks is important right now, which is hopefully what we're talking about. So that's an example of this brain's amazing ability to, I think of it like a triage system. So for example, if we go to the hospital, we hope they have a good triage system. And so let's say, God forbid, we're waiting in the emergency room, and somebody with a gunshot wound comes in. Well, they're going to go into the number one slot, and everybody else is going to have to shuffle down and wait their turn. Well, so in our brain, we also have a triage system of sorts. Okay, again, all that data download, and the brain has to keep us safe, so it has to prioritize. Things that are dangerous have to go into the number one slot. And so what has happened in the person with bothersome tinnitus is tinnitus has erroneously, by mistake, gotten into the triage system, and instead of not even getting into the triage system to begin with, has gone into the number one slot. And that person is locked and loaded and living their lives focusing on this benign body sensation. So it's, let's go back to stress. Okay, again, this is, Viktor Frankl was he was in the Holocaust, and he then became a psychiatrist, and he wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. And in that book, he wrote that between every stimulus and response is a space, and within this space lies our freedom and our choice. Between every stimulus and response is a space, and within that space lies our freedom and our choice. Okay, so when we're stressed, we all want to live with freedom and choice, but when people are coming into my office with bothersome tinnitus, they're going tinnitus reaction, tinnitus reaction, tinnitus reaction. And from what we've spoken about today, their reaction to it is actually inaccurate. Now, if we can create some space, we now can respond to tinnitus in a new way. And there are many ways to do that. And so what we see is stress closes the gap and relaxation opens up the gap so that we can start to choose other options on how we will respond to tinnitus in a more healthful, in a more accurate way. And so this is where mindfulness and meditation come in. As you know, we have research showing that mindfulness-based tinnitus stress reduction, it's an 8-week program that helps people shift tinnitus from the 30 million bothersome group into, the 20 million bothersome group into the 30 million bothersome group. And so there, by using meditation, what we find is that it's a wonderful way to tune the orchestra of the brain. Meditation is, another way to create that balance in the mind so that we can create some choice and freedom. And again, it allows us to respond to tinnitus after we get accurately educated. So when tinnitus shows up, the prefrontal cortex can say, I'm not going to react to it in that fear way, like I have in the past. Instead, I'm going to ask myself, how can I help myself in light of the fact that tinnitus is here? Maybe I can move into it. Maybe I can, maybe I can allow it to be there. Maybe I can go take a shower because that always relaxes me with tinnitus. Maybe I can go drink a cup of coffee. Maybe I can go drink a cup of decaf coffee. Maybe I can go for a walk outside. You start to get your bag of tricks together so that in any given moment when tinnitus is there, we can start responding to it with calm. Because ultimately what we're trying to do is disengage tinnitus from fear. Okay? Because when we disengage tinnitus from fear, it leaves the triage system, it leaves the emergency room and naturally recedes to the background. Okay, so ultimately what we want to do is make tinnitus boring to the brain. And that's where we use our prefrontal cortex, our knowing mind, the one that's educated about what tinnitus is. It's a benign body sensation that the brain thinks is important to pay attention to when in fact it isn't. The brain has made an error and we can use our conscious mind to chill out the amygdala and have it calm down and not trip the switch so that we go into panic mode and connect tinnitus with fear or frustration so that our lens gets locked and loaded around it. And so again, talking about ways of relaxing ourselves, first education, okay? And then another thing that can be very helpful for people with bothersome tinnitus is sound. Ears love to hear. Okay, so we want to let our ears hear. So oftentimes it's, people will find sounds that are comfortable for them. Now, if you're deaf, that's going to be a little bit more tricky. But even if you're hard of hearing, you can put in background sound, white noise, pink noise, the sound of rain, of an ocean, or, loud enough sounds that it helps to kind of soften the experience of tinnitus. And those sounds have to be relaxing to the brain. You don't want to pick a sound that isn't relaxing to your brain. Now, other things that you can do to help yourself are also things, again, I keep mentioning it, but meditation. Now, what I love about meditation is you don't need a doctor's prescription for it. It doesn't need to cost anything. You can use it at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. You can use it at 3 o'clock in the morning. And so starting a mindfulness meditation practice helps us, I think of it as helping us to tune the orchestra of the mind. Okay, the amygdala is overfiring. The mind is overvigilant to something that was never theirs to attach to. And so how do we disengage tinnitus from fear? We tune the mind and start to tune our instrument with meditation is one way, eating a healthy diet is another way. There's so many different ways that we can help ourselves to find balance. And it's never one thing. It's always a flood of different things. And so, for the sake of time today, I want to open us up to questions. At the end, I'm going to put up a slide that gives you access to both my email so that you can ask me any questions that come up afterwards. I love to talk about this topic and always happy to be in communication with people. Also gives you access to the mindful, or gives you the address for the mindfultinnitusrelief.com course. Now that 8-week course is something anybody anywhere can sign up for. And it starts you off on an 8-week path to, number one, reducing anxiety around tinnitus. Number two, making sure you're an expert in what tinnitus is. And number three, again, starting you off on the mindfulness meditation practice so that you can tune the brain, so that you can start responding to tinnitus in new ways that disengage it from fear. And so also on that website, I've started writing an awful lot. I have a blog that anybody can go to and read about different short articles on different topics related to tinnitus that will kind of branch out on probably a lot of the discussion that we're having today. But let me do this and open us up to questions. I know we got a late start and I want to be sensitive to the interpreter's time. So again, there's so many different areas we can touch on, but I want to be more specific to this group. So if anybody has a question, please ask.